So we've been learning a lot about the New Testament. We've talked several times about manuscripts for the New Testament, but what does that look like? How many do we actually have? What is the condition and quality? How close are they to the original? And that's what we're going to be looking at in this class. So when you think of a manuscript, I'm not sure what you think of, but you cannot think of a manuscript as like a complete portion of like the Gospel of Luke. We have a lot of fragments. We do have some other portions in which we do have an entire book where we may have half of the book, but for the most part, a lot of the manuscripts we have been segmented and broken just because of the amount of distribution that occurred with the New Testament manuscripts, and also the discoveries of them as well, and just the age. So when you think about manuscripts, try to get out of your mind of like, there is like the entire New Testament compiled all together that we've discovered. We're discovering portions and pieces of manuscripts as time reveals them, and as more discoveries begin to happen as well. Now, one awesome piece of manuscript that I want to talk to you guys about is called P52. Now, when you hear P52, the P designates that it's a papyri. Now, P52 was discovered to have been dated between roughly the late 1st century into the early 2nd century. And in this on one section of this papyri, it is John chapter 18, verses 31 through 33, and on the other side is John chapter 18, verses 37 through 38, and it's no bigger than the palm of my hand. Incredible that we have a manuscript going that close back to the Apostle John, who roughly lived and died around late 1st century. Now here's a question though, are earlier manuscripts better? Well, not necessarily. Sometimes they are, but just because the age of proximity doesn't necessarily dictate that that is a more reliable transcript or a more reliable manuscript. However, the less time we do have between the original date of authorship and the manuscript that we have, that is very helpful in New Testament textual criticism and also the reliability of scriptures. Now, the ability to compare several manuscripts at the same time help translators out to derive the most original meaning. So if I've got 5 different manuscripts and they say 5 different things, I can compare and contrast to see which ones are saying the same things and which ones are not necessarily saying what it is saying from the original author's intent. Now, here's what's interesting. Any other Greco-Roman author, right? The earliest manuscript, for instance, Tacitus, he lived between 56 to 120 AD. The earliest manuscript we have of his writing was in the 9th century. Livy, who lived 59 BC to 17 AD, we have the earliest manuscript for him 500 years after his death or after the original writing. So for most ancient Greco-Roman authors, it's typically a 500-year span before we actually have the first writing or manuscript discovered. Now, how does the New Testament compare? That's a great question. The New Testament has over 5,700 manuscripts in Greek alone. That's just Greek. We have 10,000 in Latin, and we have 1 million quotations from our early church fathers. Now, what we really have here, as many scholars call it, it's an embarrassment of riches. We have 11 2nd century manuscripts from the New Testament. That is significant. This is called an embarrassment of riches because we have so many manuscripts that it is roughly 1,000 times more than any other Greco-Roman author has. And Homer is probably the closest ancient Greek author, and he has maybe 2,400 manuscripts, whereas the New Testament has 10 times that amount. Now, if each papyri or manuscript is about 2.5 inches thick, and I take up someone like all the Greek authors that we have in their manuscripts outside the New Testament, I would get a pile of manuscripts 4 feet tall. If I was to do the same thing with the New Testament manuscripts, I would have a stack over 1 mile high. That is what the embarrassment of riches is. We have so many manuscripts, more than any other Greco-Roman author. It's incredible. So now, let's think about this. If we look at the evidence, the sheer number and proximity of all of these manuscripts have to lead to conflicting issues between the manuscripts, correct? Is that an issue? Is that a problem? How can we negotiate that? Come back for the next lesson, and we're going to unpack and discover what that means.